What's up, y'all? It's your man, Steve Harvey, and we got a good one for you today. You see, Standard's rotating soon, right? And that is everyone's favorite thing about Standard. Not a single person in the world has an issue with the fact that Standard rotates. Nobody. It's just you, really, and most other Magic players for that matter, but I am one of the very few of us who legitimately enjoys the fact that Standard is a rotating format. It helps keep things fresh, the old stuff leaves, the new stuff has a chance to get a foothold, some breathing room in Standard to where we get to experiment with these new ideas, these new mechanics, these new cards that we're all excited about. So that's cool. But equally as important and exciting as that is all the old cards that have been in Standard for the last year we get to analyze through a new lens, and maybe some cards that have been riding the bench for their first year in Standard finally get a starting position. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Let's look at the top 10 cards that I think are post-rotation sleepers.
And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech.
And we're back now. I missed you very much, but before we get to the meat of the video, I just want to remind you that I'm from a time when people were kind to each other. I'm from a time when you didn't have to lock your doors at night and you knew your male person's name. I'm from a time when we liked YouTube videos. But maybe I'm just from a simpler time. Like and subscribe. But let's go ahead and get to the actual content du jour today. We're going to talk about, I say, 10 cards that are going to be post-rotation sleepers, but you know me, we're actually going to talk about like a 36. Actually, I think we're actually down to like 13 to 15 cards that I'm going to mention today that might do a thing post-rotation. They're doing a whole lot of things right now. So, you know, if you're a follower of the channel, and thank you very much if you are, by the way, that I've been doing honorable mentions like right before number 1 or before we get to the top 3. But I'm gonna return to primitivism. I'm gonna go back to tradition and do our honorable mentions here at the beginning of this video because I think that a lot of these picks are solid picks, but I wanted some room on the list for some real speculative stuff, the juice, the sauce, you know, the cream in this coffee? Yeah, sure. It's, you know, the analogy I'm trying to make. Some stuff that maybe isn't powerful enough or certain enough, in my mind at least, to make the list, but I nonetheless think has some spice to it. So I got 3 picks for honorable mention that I want to run through real quick. Now, the first HM of the video might make you say, and that's Dream Shackle Geist. Now, I got a few things to say about this guy, but not too much. You know, first of all, Spikefield Hazard rotates. So basically every 1 toughness creature in the format gets slightly better, especially the ones that Spikefield Hazard gets a lot of mana value on, like this guy. But also Vanishing Verse rotates. I'm going to go ahead and tell you at the top of the video that I think I only have to say 3 times in the whole video that Vanishing Verse rotates. I'm going to try to keep the mentioning of that to a minimum, but just keep it in the back of your head. I think it is important that the most catch-all removal spell that also exiles in this format is going to rotate. So all of that helps both of those spells get mana value on this. And another thing, the blue-based tempo decks actually don't look so bad right now, and they don't lose like basically anything to rotation. So these mono blue or blue-white tempo decks that you see pop up on Arena every now and again might end up playing a 2-of copy of this. Again, since so many of its natural predators rotate. No Elite Spellbinder to trade with it in the air. No Lolth to make spiders to block it and just blow you out. I'm telling you, a few cards rotate that make Dream Shackle look a little bit better than it is now. And if things are a little bit more creature-based and we're fighting it out in the trenches, battling on the ground and all that, then maybe the ability to get this kind of tempo will really matter. But that's all I got to say about DSG. Let's move on to Reclusive Taxidermist. This is a weird-looking pick, I think, to a lot of people, but Tangled Floor Hedron rotates, Sculptor of Winter rotates, a lot of really good and relatively highly played 2-mana, ramp ends up rotating in this next format. Prosperous Innkeeper is rotating out of the format. So this is actually a decent little 2-mana guy with 2 toughness. It's not the most toughness, but it's some toughness. He can actually be a 4/4 a little bit later on in the game. That ain't too shabby. And he makes whatever color mana you want just for a 2-mana investment. It's not the worst card in the world, especially when, pathways rotate, and if we don't get a good substitute for those, then we're going to be looking for ways to fix our mana in these still inevitable 3-color decks, and Taxidermist might be a big part of that, while also providing a decent body in the mid to late game. So just remember this card exists. It's about to be one of the better 2-mana ramp pieces in the format. Now, my last honorable mention was basically on the list the entire time I was making the list, and then I just couldn't find room for him, so I was like, we'll have 3 honorable mentions. It's Old Rutstein. I really like this guy, and you probably do too. He's an awesome dude, creates a lot of value, especially over long games. So if Standard stays this sort of mid-range 2- and 3-color good stuff pile kind of a format, then obviously we're looking at some relatively long games as there's mid-range engines that try to come together and battle each other, and this makes tons of value over the course of just a few turns, right? It could easily help replace things like Prosperous Innkeeper and, more accurately, Skullport Merchant. This gets you more mana over time than Skullport Merchant. Merchant gives you the 1 treasure. This could give you a bunch of them. And bodies, for that matter, that's not too shabby. So there's a lot of things I like about Rutstein, and even though it doesn't draw cards the way Merchant does, once Merchant is rotated out of the format, this is now your 3 mana, 4 toughness, make treasures guy. It's just a pretty solid dude that doesn't generate near the amount of value that a lot of cards in the format generate right now, but a lot of those cards are about to rotate, so this might be some of the best value in town come autumn. But for number 10, we're really going to replace Prosperous Innkeeper this time around with Courier's Briefcase. Now, there's a lot of ways this card could go. If we don't get great replacements for pathways, then this can really help fix mana in these 3, 4, and again even 5-color decks that a card like Briefcase wants to be in. It's not quite Prosperous Innkeeper, but it is definitely the next best thing. So I could see it seeing play even in like normal ramp decks, but if there is kind of a 5-color focus in the format, this instantly becomes, in a lot of ways, even better than a Prosperous Innkeeper. If you're actually able to hold on to it and not pop it for the game, 3 cards in the mid to late game as a refill is usually better than a few life, especially in decks that aren't specifically like life gain decks or whatever. Prosperous Innkeeper is fine and all, but 3 cards? That's a lot of cards. So I think Courier's Briefcase has a bright future in the format, even if it doesn't see too much play right now. But for number 9, it wouldn't be an SBMTG list without a couple of 5 or 6 mana creatures that I have to justify in my head, and we do have a few of those on this list. Now, I could just say Legendary Dragons for this one, and you'd probably know what I was talking about, the Kamigawa Dragons, but there's 2 in specific that I think really benefit from this new format, and that is both Junji and Ao. Now, I think the bad guy, Ao, Scott Hall over here, actually doesn't quite stand as much to gain from the new format. It's not really replacing any like mono white 5-drops that are leaving the format, right? It's just one of the more powerful dragons in the format, and when it dies, it can grab a Wandering Emperor, right? It seems pretty decent to me. Now, Junji, on the other hand, could replace a 5-drop in black decks, and that's Lolth. Lolth is leaving the format. We might be looking for tantalizing 5... Why did I choose that word from my entire vocabulary? We might be looking for sexy 5-drops in black to play, and Junji's a pretty good one, but all of these Kamigawa dragons with dies triggers benefit from the passing of Vanishing Verse. As mentioned, number 2, I only get 1 more in the entire video. Oh no. We're only 3 entries in. In any case, yeah, obviously I have to bring that up. Vanishing Verse leaves the format, so I think these are a little bit more likely to die, which is what you kind of want them to do. What you want to do is to have them fly over for 5 every turn. But if they're going to die, you'll want to get that trigger, and without Vanishing Verse in the format, I think you're way more likely to actually pull that off. But for number 8, I got to pull aside a card and have a talk with it real quick. Hey, Deadly Dispute, you come over here. Come over here. Let's have a little chat. That's right. Deadly Dispute is getting whacked come fall. And it's a really good card. It's going to be hard to replace the double D, right? You get the treasure token. It's an offer you can't refuse. Not the bad card, an offer you can't refuse. It's an actual one that you can't refuse to have in your deck. Now, look, some of the stuff that goes really well with Deadly Dispute, your eye twitches, your shambling gas, your normal stuff like that, are rotating out of the format. So the need for a card like this might be much less when rotation hits, but it's always nice to have a card like it, and that's exactly what a little chat is, right? You actually get to see more cards, which matters. Like, it's not a treasure token, but seeing more cards is really, really good. You also get to cast it without sacrificing a creature which is fantastic. So there's actually some things that I like about a little chat that don't make it a better card than Deadly Dispute, and don't even make it a parallel card to Deadly Dispute. But again, once this rotation thing hits, baby, you're not necessarily even looking for the same power level. You're looking for a similar power level, and I think that's where we are with this card. Number 7, yet another big fat boy. It's a fat creature, but I actually think this one is more than worth playing. And again, even though there's an analog to it in Standard that's almost certainly better than it, it does hold some things over its counterpart. Number 7. Are we really only at number 7? Holy crap. This Volatile Arsonist. I've had a lot to say about these cards. Now, obviously, this replaces Goldspan Dragon in the format, but I think it does a pretty decent job, even though they are in no way the same card. But they are both 5 mana, 4/4 haste dudes. And the fact that Goldspan Dragon is also that is probably like the main thing keeping this card from seeing play. But once Goldspan is out, it's like you got this, you got Urabrask. And I actually think that in the kind of dedicated aggro deck you want to put this card in and like top out your curve at this. In a way, it's better than Goldspan Dragon, right? Like Goldspan Dragon's in a lot of decks. They have like Titan of Industry right now, for instance, right? Or they have these game plans where you keep targeting your Goldspan with a thing over and over to generate mana, and you go into sort of a loop that makes your Goldspan huge with a show of confidence, right? There's a lot of flashy ways to play with Goldspan Dragon that we've seen all throughout its tenure in Standard. Just a sturdy dude. Your opponent tries to kill it, you get a treasure token, you can negate the spell they're using to try to kill your Goldspan. There's a lot of sick tricks with Gary Oldman in the format that aren't necessarily available with Volatile Arsonist, but I will say that Arsonist is a little bit better at just being your aggro 5-drop if you're going to play one. Volatile Arsonist actually does more damage the turn it comes down than a Goldspan Dragon, which, again, if you're just trying to count the 20 in an aggro deck or something, that's in some ways better than Goldspan. And this can even pick stuff off. I think there's some awesome things about Arsonist, and of course it goes in the Werewolves decks too. So, point in its favor, probably. Just a sweet card that probably would see play if it weren't for Goldspan, so it very likely will get to when autumn comes around. Number 6 is Biting Palm Ninja. BPN. I really like this card already, but obviously a lot of the cards on this list have a counterpart that they're replacing, in giant air quotes, that they're probably not quite as good as, but there's nonetheless looking like a replacement for when rotation hits. And this one is obviously the replacement for Elite Spellbinder, but that's not the only reason why I think it might be okay. Now, Mono White aggro looks kind of okay after rotation. Mono Red aggro looks kind of okay after rotation. But Mono Black, especially if it gets a piece or two here and there, actually looks kind of impressive after rotation. It's got a decent 1-drop, no Kiva Reckoner Raid. Decent 2-drops, obviously, with like Tenacious Underdog. It's got Graph Reaver, basically the only important 2-mana 3/3 in the format after rotation. And in the 3-drop slot, it's got this. And that's actually not a bad start to an aggro deck. Elite Spellbinder was famous for coming down on turn 3 and grabbing that sweeper, that meat hook, that Doomscar, whatever, out of your opponent's hand, or just that big play, the Planeswalker that's going to take one of your dudes off the field, the Wandering Emperor that's going to turn the game around for them. Elite Spellbinder is great at doing that, but if you can't close in time, they're just going to get to play their sweeper or their Wandering Emperor anyway. But with Biting Palm Ninja, you don't really have to worry about that. The problem with it, compared to Elite Spellbinder, is you're going to have to take some of your value off the board in order to ninjutsu in a Biting Palm Ninja, which can suck in an aggro deck. But if we have some decent, like, enter the battlefield triggers, it's not so bad. I also kind of like the fact that on turn 2 you can Tenacious Underdog, turn 3 get in with the Underdog, return it to your hand, ninjutsu this in, grab something out of your opponent's hand, and then next turn just blitz in the Underdog if that's what it takes. It's a cool line, but either way, I think Mono Black aggro has some things going for it after rotation, and this might be a very important piece in it. This video isn't sponsored by Nord or anything. I'm not going to tell you to get a VPN. Maybe pick up some BPNs along the way. But number 5, halfway down the list, we finally made it halfway. This card is proof positive that this list is not about cards that are going to be instantly incredibly playable as soon as rotation hits. Sometimes the definition of a sleeper is a card that has to wait a little bit. And if Reality Heist doesn't see a ton of play when Dominaria comes out, I imagine it'll probably see some play when the Brothers War does. About all I have to say about the card. If we see an Artifacts deck, this is probably going to be a key 2 of, at the very least, in a deck like that. Picture a card like Into the Story in Rogues. Right? It's a 6-mana thing. It's instant speed, draws a bunch of cards, but costs a bunch of mana unless you have the requisite amount of things out, right? And this is, or, you know, unless you meet the requisite requirements. In this case, it was your opponent's graveyard is a certain number of cards. In this case, I think we might be seeing a similar card to that, right? A tribal artifacts deck that ends up playing this late in the game for its refill and gets, hopefully, 2 very important artifacts to help its engines run. So just remember that Reality Heist exists. I still think this card has plenty of time to be a very important card in Standard, even if it still has some time to wait. Now, number 4 is Faithful Mending, and to a lesser extent, Tainted Pact. Hey everybody, down here on the bottom right of your screen, here I am. It's editing Dev. Dev is saying Tainted Pact and will probably continue to do so throughout the majority of this entry here. Tainted Pact is this very confusing card from Odyssey. It's currently $11. It's not a bad price. Not even really sure what this thing does, although I remember having seen it back in the day. But I'm going to keep calling Tainted Indulgence Tainted Pact. So sometimes it sure is a chore editing this big galoot. But let's back to Couch Dev, who will probably keep saying Tainted Pact. I think people just cannot wait for Tainted Pact to be like super playable. Right? It's already played in some arena decks, and so is Faithful Mending for that matter. But I feel like the amount of decks and the amount of just general play that both Faithful Mending and Tainted Pact see is going to skyrocket post-rotation. Whether it's a blue-white control deck or an Esper control deck that wants to flash back memory deluges and other things so they can throw them in the yard with Tainted Pact, they can throw them in the yard with Faithful Mending, right? All variety of like Reanimator decks are going to want to play these cards because they're just the best ways in the entire format to set up a Reanimator pile on turn 2. So just all kinds of stuff these go in, again, whether it's control or combo or Reanimator or other decks for that matter. So I just, especially once we're in a smaller format and the value that these things creates is a little bit more apparent and valuable, I think that they're probably going to see a ton more play. But we made it to the top 3, everybody. Give yourself a pat on the back. It's been a long video, I think, at least, at this point. But for number 3, let's talk a bit about removal. Now, I won't mention a removal piece that I only have one more legal mention of in this video because I need to bring it up again. But it is an important piece of removal, isn't it? And it rotates. So people are going to be looking for replacements for not only that, but things like Blood Chief's Thirst and a couple of other pretty important removal pieces that we've come to lean on in this environment. And you've got Infernal Grasp, you've got March of Wretched Sorrow, you've got a fair amount of decent removal spells still left in the format. One that we'll still have access to that doesn't see much play now, but I think could see a lot of play here very soon, is Rite of Oblivion. Now, when Orzhov Midrange, Orzhov Tokens, Orzhov Planeswalkers, Orzhov Blood on the Snow, whatever you call that deck, when it was popular, we saw a little bit of Rite of Oblivion, but since then, its play has tapered off, at least in tournaments and even on Arena. I just don't see too much of this card anymore. But, well, again, once rotation hits, even though, I have to bring this up again, we lose some really cool stuff to sack to this, like Eye Twitch and Shambling Ghast. We'll still have plenty of stuff to sack to it. We still have Wedding Announcement to play on our decks, right? So there should be no shortage of smallish creatures or tokens to sack to Rite of Oblivion. And this is effectively a 2-for-1 kind of, sort of, in and of itself. I won't call it a 2-for-1 because you have to sacrifice stuff to it, but still, you know, you can cast this card twice, is what I'm trying to say. It costs a total of 6 mana to cast twice. It exiles anything non-land permanent. Come on, it's even better than some other cards that I can't mention right now. Especially once rotation hits and we hit the Wild West, the big wide open world, and we have no idea what's out there. It might be important at the beginning of the format when you're experimenting on Arena to pack a couple of cards that can remove literally anything at a relatively low cost. And Rite of Oblivion might be the best thing in the format at doing that. We'll move on here to number 2. Now, I tried to stay away from cards that already see a fair amount of play, especially in the Arena environment. Even if they don't see much play in tournaments, they're not going to show up on like a tier list anytime soon. I still didn't want to include cards that see tons of Arena play, but there is one card that you come across probably once or twice per play session on Arena, once or twice a day, that I still think gets much, much better, not only once rotation hits, but also, again, once the Brothers' War comes out. And that's Oni-Cult Anvil. Now, again, you see this card every now and again. It's not necessarily a card that doesn't see any play and will convert into a card that sees all the play. It's a card that sees some play right now, and its deck isn't perfect or anything, but but is very likely to A, pick up some pieces in the Brothers' War or Dominaria for that matter, and B, again, the bigger fish in a much smaller pond theory I think applies very much so to Oni-Cult Anvil, right? What I was saying about Rutstein earlier, right? We have so many cards from Kaldheim all the way onward in these rotating sets that create a lot of value, whether it's things like Binding the Old Gods or Lolth again with that card. But, I could go on forever. I just don't want to give myself all the editing work of putting cards on screen that I continue to name. But it's not necessarily like it's Throne of Eldraine standard, but there are a lot of very powerful cards that create a lot of value, even in like Strixhaven, right? Like learning is a fair amount of value. So once all of those cards exit standard, we're going to be looking for ways what cards generate the most value at this time in standard. And I think there's a good chance that Oni-Cult Anvil might be one of those cards. But there is one card, and it's our final card of the day, that's in the running for, again, the most improved player trophy. This card doesn't see quite as much play as a card like Oni-Cult Anvil, and it really hasn't done too much at tournaments, unlike Oni-Cult Anvil, which has seen some tournament play here and there. This is a card that is more or less experimented with at this point. I was going to say tolerated, but it's experimented with from time to time in the arena environment. Us content creators love it, but you don't really run across fight rigging too often these days. But I think you're going to run into it way more in just about 6 weeks' time. Now, first of all, a lot of the stuff that people are using to proc fight rigging quickly, still in the format, right? Shakedown Heavy as your 3-drop, still in the format. Reservoir Kraken as your 4-drop in these Sultai decks, still in the format. So a lot of the things that we're doing to make this card work, still in the format. You still get to do them. Plus, this is where I get to talk about Vanishing Verse again. Vanishing Verse, leaving the environment. Now, there's still plenty of main deckable things, even in Best of One, that especially in Best of One for that matter, that people are still going to have, still have access to Boseiju who endures, which is going to be a killer for this card some of the time. But, again, we lose not only Verse, but like Binding the Old Gods and a bunch of other stuff that has a large spread of playability in terms of what it can remove. So I think enchantments aren't like entirely safe to play or anything in the next environment, but enchantments might, at least briefly, be more safe to play than they are right now. Again, especially in environments like Best of One, where it really doesn't cost too much to put cards, again, like Binding in your deck or Vanishing Verse, right? You might as well play those cards in your deck. And they happen to be able to remove a thing like fight rigging. So, again, slightly more safe to play, keeps all of its enablers, right? Keeps all the stuff that you want to get for free with it, the most popular stuff to get for free off of a fight rigging, or at least try to get for free, is like Titan of Industry and Storm the Festival, right? And those also stay in the format. So the fight rigging decks that we've seen so far are more or less completely intact after rotation, and this is a much more powerful card than it might look like. Even if it doesn't get you a free card for a couple of turns, it still kind of acts like a hard-to-remove Luminarch Aspirant, and there's really nothing wrong with that either. So, just a sweet card here that I've enjoyed playing with a lot on Arena over the last month or two and experimenting with and stuff. And honestly, I think those experiments have borne out to where there's evidence this card will be very powerful. Again, in a smaller pond, instead of an 8-set standard, a 5-set standard. This card could really shine when, 3 entire sets, literally 1,000 cards leave standard. And almost none of them were in this deck. But that is it for the list. And, just looking at the list here on my phone, every time I look at it, I'm like, this is a very weird list. I can't get over the notion that this is a strange one. So let me know how you felt about it down there in the comment section. Anything I missed, make sure you let me know what you think your favorite sleepers are down there, because that's important to me. I do, in fact, read your comments on the comment board. But aside from that, just do the YouTube stuff. Like the video, because I'm from a simpler time. You can also sandwich. If you haven't done that yet, it would mean a lot to me. I'm trying to get to 350,000 subs. I'm at 125, so we're almost halfway there. We're almost halfway there. So help us get us to 126. I will. I've been at 125 for like ever. Give me to 126. I'll cry on camera. Probably not, but I'll try. Aside from that, I guess you can check out other videos if you want to. They're over here. You can check out the Patreon at patreon.com/sbmtg, where you can vote on content and really help out the channel just $1 a month at a time. Aside from that, check me out playing some Magic on Twitch. Look at me playing Magic, making misplays, forgetting reconfigure is even a thing you can do. I do stuff like that. Come scream at me at twitch.tv/sbmtgdev. That's where we get the rejoining ranked and dank jank videos from. So come out. Come chill with us. It's fun. But aside from that, I am donezo for this one. So I am Deb from the place, and I love you all very much. I'll catch you cats later. Thanks for watching, wizards. Spread love and be kind.